The standoff. Drake's golden eyes flicked between Lyra and the drones on the monitor, his muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Blood still trickled from the corner of his mouth, but his breathing had steadied. Vathari healing, Lyra noted. Faster than human. You should turn me in, he growled. They'll reward you. Lyra snorted, tossing him a compression bandage. Yeah, with a bullet in my skull for contaminating their crime scene. She tapped the screen, zooming in on the drone's insignia. Blackstar Security. They don't ask questions first. Drake's claws retracted slightly. You know them. They torched a research outpost last year for harboring insurgents. She met his gaze. Turns out, the insurgent was a malfunctioning water purifier. A flicker of something, amusement, passed over his face before he winced, pressing a hand to his ribs. The hunt closes in. Lyra's wristcom buzzed. A robotic voice crackled. Placeholder 0626 scan in progress. Remain indoors. She cursed, yanking open a storage locker. We need to move. Now. Drake didn't argue. He stood, swaying slightly, then ripped the 4 from his arm. Where? Storm shelter. Underground. She threw him a frayed poncho. Cover your damn scales. They slipped out the back hatch just as searchlights swept the biodome's roof. The wind howled, red dust stinging Lyra's eyes as she led Drake toward a rusted hatch half buried in the dunes. You're slow, he muttered, gripping her elbow when she stumbled. You're heavy, she shot back, though his grip was oddly careful. The truth in the dark. The shelter was a claustrophobic bunker, cramped, but stocked. Lyra sealed the hatch, plunging them into gloom before flicking on a dim biolume. Drake immediately scoped the exits, his pupils dilating in the dark. You bring all your dates here. Only the ones trying to kill me. She tossed him a protein pack. Eat. You look like hell. He caught it, sniffed the contents, then devoured it in 2 bites. Why risk yourself for me? He asked between mouthfuls. I could slaughter you before you screamed. Lyra leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You could. But you won't. Confident. Observant. She nodded at his hands, claws sheathed. If you wanted me dead, I'd be bleeding out already. Silence. Then, grudgingly, you're unlike other humans. The fractured passed. Above them, the drone's thrumming faded. Lyra exhaled. So. Who poisoned you? Drake's jaw tightened. My second in command. Ah. Workplace drama. A sharp glare. He betrayed the Void Order. Sold our patrol routes to the Crick Syndicate. His claws flexed. When I confronted him, he framed me for treason. Lyra whistled. And the brand? A death sentence. His voice dropped. My own fleet hunts me. Outside, a distant explosion rattled the dunes. Blackstar was getting impatient. The bargain. Lyra chewed her lip. I can get you off Mars. Drake went still. How? I've got a contact at the Freehold docks. But it'll cost you. What do you want? She grinned. Tell me one honest thing about Vathari culture. He blinked. What? You've got data caches full of weapons specs and battle tactics, but nothing about you people. What do you eat for breakfast? Do you have poetry? Music? Drake stared like she'd sprouted a second head. Then, quietly, we sing to our dead. The Shrival, a war chant, so their souls fight on in the void. Lyra's smile softened. See? That wasn't so hard. Another explosion, closer this time. The shelter's lights flickered. Now, she said, grabbing a dusty pulse rifle from under the cot, let's get you home. The sky split open. Lyra Voss was elbow-deep in hydroponic algae when the emergency alarms blared. The biodome's reinforced glass vibrated as a shockwave rolled across the Martian tundra. Her coffee mug toppled, staining research notes with bitter brown. "Not another damn asteroid," she muttered, but the alert on her wrist display turned her blood to ice. Debris trajectory, artificial. Origin unknown. She grabbed her medkit, its weight familiar from a dozen wilderness rescues, and slapped the door control. The airlock hissed open, releasing a puff of stale oxygen into the planet's thin atmosphere. Wind whipped her dark braids sideways as she squinted at the horizon. There, a jagged scar of fire tore through the crimson sky. The wreck. Lyra's rover bounced over basalt ridges, its headlights cutting through the dust storm kicked up by the impact. The crash site steamed in a crater 20 meters wide, the sand fused to glass. At its center lay a vessel no larger than a cargo pod, its matte black hull etched with spiraling glyphs that seemed to move when she looked away. Her scanner chirped. Life signs, 1. Critical. A crack split the pod side. Inside, shadows writhed. First contact. Lyra approached, pulse hammering in her ears. The stench hit her first, burnt metal and something coppery, wrong. Then she saw him. The alien lay half-crushed beneath a collapsed bulkhead, his armored plates cracked like eggshell. Blue blood oozed from his nostrils, his chest rising in shallow, wet hitches. When Lyra's shadow fell across his face, his eyes snapped open, golden irises with vertical slits, the pupils flaring wide. A gloved hand shot out, clamping her wrist with terrifying strength. "Stay back," his voice was a rasp, his lips peeling back to reveal needle-sharp canines. Lyra didn't flinch. "You're drowning in your own blood," she said, cool and clinical. "Your left lungs collapsed. Let me help." His grip tightened. "Why?" The word was a challenge, an accusation. She met his gaze. "Because I'm the only thing standing between you and a very ugly death. The burden of choice." Back in the biodome's makeshift infirmary, Lyra worked fast. The alien, Vathari, according to her database, had passed out during the rough transport. Now, under sterile lights, his injuries were even more grotesque. Rib fractures puncturing the pleural cavity. Neurotoxin residue in his bloodstream, deliberate poisoning. A brand on his shoulder, a sun crossed by a sword. Execution mark. Lyra's hands hovered over the wound. This isn't just a crash survivor. This is a fugitive. Outside, a new alert flashed, Patrol Duro deployed. Search radius, 50 kilometers. The awakening. He woke with a gasp, his body arching off the table. Lyra barely dodged the swipe of his claws as he rolled upright, muscles coiled for attack. "Easy, Tiger," she said, backing away slowly. "You're in my lab. I'm Lyra Voss. Martian Botanical Survey." The Vathari's eyes darted to the exit, then to the scalpels on the counter. "Calculating. You're human." He said it like a curse. "Observant." Lyra crossed her arms. "You got a name, or should I call you, patient asshole?" A beat of silence. Then, grudgingly, "Drake. Seventh blade of the Void Order." "Well, Drake," Lyra tossed him a clean rag for his bleeding lip, "you've got two problems. First, your own people poisoned you. Second," she tapped the security monitor. On screen, 6 armored drones fanned across the canyon. "The run begins." The storm swallowed them whole. Lyra adjusted her goggles, squinting through the swirling red dust as she led Drake across the Martian wastes. The Blackstar drones had retreated, for now, but the static in her earpiece told her they weren't giving up. "How much farther?" Drake growled, his voice barely audible over the wind. 2 clicks, Lyra shouted back. "Freeholds just past the ridge." A burst of gunfire cracked through the storm. Sand exploded at their feet. Down. Drake yanked Lyra behind a rock formation as another volley strafed the ground where they'd just been. Lyra's heart hammered. They're not scanning anymore, they're shooting. Drake bared his teeth. Told you to leave me. Shut up and move. The trap at Freehold. Freehold docks was supposed to be safe. A ramshackle hub of smugglers and off-grid traders, where credits bought silence and no one asked questions. But when Lyra and Drake staggered into the neon-lit tunnels beneath the landing pads, the place was empty. No dockworkers. No merchants. Just flickering holosigns and the stench of burnt fuel. Something's wrong, Lyra muttered. Drake's nostrils flared. Blood. Recent. Then the ambush hit. Blackstar mercs in matte black armor poured from the shadows, rifles raised. Lyra barely had time to grab her pistol before Drake moved, a blur of violence. He tore the first merc's throat out with his claws, spun, and snapped another's neck with a sickening crack. Lyra fired twice. A merc dropped. Lyra. Behind you. She whirled, too late. A rifle butt slammed into her temple. The cell. Consciousness returned in waves. Lyra's head throbbed. Her wrists were bound to a metal chair in a dim, windowless room. Across from her, Drake hung from chains bolted to the ceiling, his face a mask of blood. A man in a Blackstar officer's uniform leaned against the wall, cleaning his nails with a knife. "Dr. Voss," he said, smiling. "We've been waiting for you." Lyra spat blood. Flattered. "You've been a very bad girl. Harboring a Class X threat. That's a capital offense." He glanced at Drake. "Though I suppose we should thank you. The Void Order's offering a king's ransom for this one." Drake snarled, yanking against the chains. "Krax's lackey. Pathetic." The officer backhanded him. "Quiet, traitor." Lyra's mind raced. Krax, Drake's traitorous second-in-command. Which meant. "You're working with the Vathari," she breathed. The officer smirked. "Smart girl. Krax wants his rival disposed of. We want the Void Order's tech. A mutual arrangement. The escape." Lyra tested her bonds. Too tight. But Drake. She met his eyes. A flicker of understanding passed between them. "You'll never get away with this," Lyra bluffed, buying time. "The Martian Council is irrelevant," the officer sneered. He turned to a guard. "Prep the prisoner for transfer. Krax wants him alive." The moment the guard stepped toward Drake, Lyra moved. She kicked her chair back, shattering it against the wall. The officer shouted. Drake twisted. His chains snapped. Then it was chaos. The aftermath. Lyra didn't remember grabbing the knife. She didn't remember stabbing the officer in the thigh. But she'd never forget the way Drake tore through the remaining guards like paper, his claws glinting in the low light. When it was over, the cell was silent. Drake crouched beside her, panting. "Can you walk?" Lyra nodded, wincing. "Where now?" He hesitated. "Then, I know a ship." The revelation. The vessel was a junk heap, a dented Vathari scout craft hidden in Freehold's abandoned sector. But it flew. As Drake input coordinates, Lyra finally asked the question burning in her skull. "Why does Krax want you dead so badly?" Drake's hands stilled. "Because I discovered the truth," he said softly. "The Void Order isn't hunting humans for territory. They're harvesting them." Lyra's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Your species has a unique genetic marker. The Order's bioweapons division thinks it's the key to perfecting their soldiers." He looked at her. "That's why I ran. That's why you are in danger." Outside, engines roared. Blackstar was coming. Drake fired up the ship. Last chance to back out. Lyra strapped in. Punch it. The ghost ship. The stolen Vathari scout ship rattled like it was held together by prayers as it broke Otmo. Lyra white-knuckled the co-pilot's seat, watching Mars shrink to a rust-colored speck behind them. "You sure this thing won't implode?" she shouted over the screaming engines. Drake didn't glance up from the NAV console. 68% chance we reach the jump point. That's not reassuring. A proximity alarm blared. On the cracked view screen, 3 angular Vathari fighters dropped out of warp behind them, their hulls painted with the Void Order's jagged insignia. "Kraxa's hounds," Drake spat. He slammed his fist on the thrusters, sending the ship into a spiraling dive just as plasma fire streaked past the cockpit. Lyra's stomach lurched. "I hate space." The lawless port. They lost their pursuers in the debris field of a dead colony, barely. By the time Drake guided their limping ship into Haven's shadow, a derelict orbital station hovering in neutral space, half the console lights were blinking red. The docking bay smelled like engine grease and rotting meat. Lyra stepped onto the grated walkway, pulse pistol drawn, as a dozen pairs of eyes tracked their movements from shadowed alcoves. "Charming place," she muttered. Drake adjusted his stolen Blackstar trenchcoat to hide his scales. "Don't make eye contact. Don't accept drinks. And never ask what's in the stew." A hunched figure detached from the wall ahead. "Drake of the Void," rasped a voice like grinding gears. "Heard you were dead." Lyra tensed, but Drake lowered his guard. "Jax." The stranger pushed back their hood, revealing a face that made Lyra gasp. Vathari, but where Drake's scales were cobalt and gold, Jax's were scarred and gray, one eye replaced by a flickering cybernetic. "You brought a human." Jax sneered. "She's with me," Drake said, in a tone that ended arguments. Jax snorted. "Follow. And try not to die before we get there." The underground. They wound through Haven's underbelly, past black market surgeons and cyborg gunrunners, until Jax keyed open a hidden hatch. Inside, a makeshift war room glowed with holograms, star maps, fleet movements, and a wanted feed with Drake's face front and center. "You've been busy," Drake noted. Jax poured 3 glasses of something that smelled like turpentine. "While you were playing house with the enemy, some of us kept fighting." They tossed a data chip on the table. Krax moved up the timeline. First Harvest fleet launches in 72 hours. Lyra's glass froze halfway to her lips. Harvest fleet. The hologram shifted, showing a massive Vathari dreadnought surrounded by smaller ships, each marked with a biohazard symbol. "They're not just capturing humans," Jack said. "They're breeding them. Tailoring a new soldier strain that can survive deep space." Lyra's hand shook. "That's why they targeted Mars first. Our colony's gene mods for low gravity." Drake's claws dug into the table. "Where's the fleet staging?" "The Zareth system. But it's a fortress. Then we hit it before they launch." Jax laughed bitterly. "With what army?" Lyra exhaled. "We don't need one. We just need to get me on board." Both aliens stared at her. She tapped the bounty hologram. "Turn me in. Say you caught me fleeing with Drake. They'll take me straight to their labs, where I can plant this." She pulled a tiny device from her boot, a Martian terraforming charge, rewired into a bomb. Drake's growl shook the room. "No. It's the only way. I swore I wouldn't let them take another." He caught himself. Silence. Jax looked between them, then sighed. "There's another option. The forgotten weapon." Deep in Haven's reactor core, behind a door sealed with Vathari blood codes, lay it, a sleek, obsidian fighter craft, its wings curved like a predator's claws. "The Dusk Talon," Jax whispered. "Last of the Shadow Fleet. AI piloted. Cloak capable. And armed with that." They pointed to a torpedo rack marked with a dead language. Drake went pale. A starbreaker. Those were banned. Which is why cracks won't expect it. Jax tossed Lyra a neural headset. Human brainwaves can bypass its security. You'll have to co-pilot. Lyra blinked. Wait, me. Drake's DNA is flagged. You're the only one who can arm the payload. Drake looked ready to murder someone. If the AI rejects her, then we're all space dust, Jax finished cheerfully. Better pray your pet human's as clever as you think. The choice. Back in the war room, Lyra studied the star maps. Even with this ship, we'd need a distraction to reach the dreadnought. Jax grinned, showing filed teeth. Oh, we've got that covered. They activated a comm channel. Static, then a chorus of voices, Vathari, but speaking a dialect Lyra didn't recognize. The Shrival, Drake said, stunned. The exiles, you found them? They've been waiting for this fight. Jax leaned in. But Drake, if we do this, there's no going back. The Order will hunt every last one of us. Drake looked at Lyra, then at the hologram of the Harvest Fleet. Some oaths, he said quietly, are made to be broken. The storm breaks. 3 hours later, Lyra strapped into the Dusk Talon's cockpit, her hands sweating on the controls. The AI's voice purred in her skull through the headset. Neural sync at 87%. Adequate. Gee, thanks, she muttered. Drake, crammed into the gunner's seat behind her, gripped her shoulder. If this goes wrong. It already is wrong, she interrupted. Now let's go unwrong it. The hangar doors opened. Ahead, the void, and the glittering teeth of the coming storm.